If you're interested in making a detailed platformer just like this one, within Gamemaker, using drag and drop, then keep watching.
G'day gamers, and welcome back to our drag and drop platformer series. In the last tutorial, I showed you how to add a collectible coin to the game. In this tutorial, we're going to add a way for the player to gain points, which will then be shown as a score up the top. We also discussed the option of showing the coins and score gained as cool pop-up values that float away over time. So let's get started by looking at the Draw GUI event of OGame, which is where we are drawing the coins. Now I'd like to duplicate this and modify it so we draw our score in the center up the top. I'd also like to clean this up a bit, which will make working with it easier. So let's create a script and call it Draw Coins. So now we can go down to our game object, go to our Draw GUI event, and where we are drawing the coins, so here we're drawing a rectangle, here we're changing the font and drawing the coins. I'm going to take all of that and cut that out and then go into our Draw Coin script and we'll just paste that in. So now back into our OGame, and now that we've taken that out, we need to execute a script. So we need to execute the Draw Coin script. And essentially we're doing the same thing, except we've moved all that code to just live in that one script. So now what we can do is duplicate the Draw Coins script, and I'm going to call it Draw Score. So if we take a look at this, it's actually doing a similar thing to what our Draw Coins is doing. So we can change this section here from coins and we can call that score. The same for this section. So the top part is the shadow and just the bottom part is the text itself. Now we won't be drawing global.coins. Instead, I'm going to change this to score. Now the word score is a built-in variable that GameMaker knows. It's a global variable, so it's accessible by all objects, and we can just use that to hold our score. We don't need to declare it anywhere. By default, it's declared as 0. Now by default, all text when it's drawn is drawn aligned to the left, unless you change that with code. Now that works well for our coins because we're aligning it to the left of the screen. But for the score, I want to draw the score in the middle of the screen, so up the top in the middle. And in order to do that, we need to change the alignment. We need to change it so that it's aligned to the center. So we can go up here and we can say align, and we have a set text alignment box. Let's drag that over and let's align this one to the center. So we're setting it at FA center. I believe the FA would stand for font alignment. Now, once the alignment is set, that same alignment will be used for all other text drawing. So that means our previous draw coins will also be center aligned, which we don't want. So we need to copy this text block. And I'm going to go back to the Draw Coin script, and we're just going to paste this here and change it to FA left. So back to our score. We also need to change where the score will be drawn in its X position. So we want to draw it in the same Y location as the coins, but in the center for the X position. Now, since we are drawing in a GUI event, the GUI has its own resolution independent to the game's resolution. So similarly to when we drew the rectangle last tutorial, to find the center of the GUI, we can use the function display get GUI width. And we need to divide it by 2 because we want to know what half of that width is. I'm just going to take a copy of that and paste that down the bottom as well. Remember, it's also a little offset, so I'm going to just -2 from this, and that will just align it correctly. Now, I also don't want to draw in yellow. I'm going to change this to white. I'm going to draw the score in white. And the last thing we want to do is back in OGame, we actually need to just run the script. So take a copy of that, paste it here, and then change it to draw the score as well. So let's press F5 or run, and we can see what the score looks like. Great, so we've got our score up there and our coins. So in order for the player to receive the score, we need certain things to happen. For example, when the enemy dies, we want to allocate some points then. So let's go to our enemy. And in the variable definitions, I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to call it points. And we'll just set this to 10. Now we need to know when to move the points to the player. The best time for that is when the enemy dies. So if we look at the player, and we look at the collision with the enemy, the section where the player is dying is just here. So start it up here, we go all the way down, and we're looking at the section here where we change to the dead state. So we need to assign a variable at this point, and we need to set our score to be whatever the value of points is, relative. So then it'll just add points to score. So let's test that out. Press play. And now when an enemy dies, you can see our score up the top has increased each time. Now that works great, but what players like to see in a game is visual feedback, so they know how they are doing. So let's add a visual representation of the score they gained from jumping on the enemy. If you look at this section from Blizzard's Warcraft 3 Reforged, as the peons collect wood and gold, the amount gained is displayed, and it's even color-coded, showing what was collected. Let's add a similar system for our game, using a single object to display the values. So let's create the new object, and we're going to call it O floating text. So we go to Objects, right-click, O_floating text. Now we don't need a sprite, as we will just be drawing text in this. So let's add a few variables in the variable section. So the first thing we'll need is the actual text we want to show. So let's add a variable to store the text to show, and also a color for that text. I'm just going to call the variable txt for the text, and I'm going to add a variable called col for color, and this one I'm going to set to c_white. So C standing for color. So Gamemaker has a few colors built into the game, and you can just reference them like this, or you can use some methods to create your own color. But for our purposes, we're just going to use the built-in ones. Now let's create a draw event. And this is where we can draw the text. Now we want the text to show in a specific font and size. So let's go to our fonts, and let's create one called FNT_floating text. Now for the font, I'm just going to select Arial Black. It's a common font that you should have, and I'm going to set the size to 18. Now when you're over here, you can press on Game Preview, and it should show you what the font looks like. If it doesn't show you the right font, which is what's happening here, you can just regenerate the font texture, and that should show you the correct font then. And then close that down. So you can jump back to objects that you're working on by holding down the control button and pressing tab, and that brings up the workspace overview, and this shows the windows that are currently open. Now the one that I was previously working on was floating text, so you can use the shift key to move up or use just the tab key to move down, all while holding the control key. And it's very easy to move very quickly between the windows that you have active. So let's draw our points. I'm going to drag across a font block. So we're going to set our font to the one we created, which is floating text. Now we need to set the color. And we need to set the color for the text that we're drawing. So let's drag that across, and we're going to use the variable that we created over here, which is col. I'm going to untick the alpha. I'm not going to use the alpha for this one this time. Now let's also go to the draw, and we want to take the draw value code block. Let's drag that in. I don't want to caption this time, but I just want to draw the value of txt, and that is the name of our variable for storing our text to draw. Now for the X and Y, I'm just going to tick relative because we don't want to move from our current position. So in order to test it out, we need a way for the object to be created. So just where we added the points, let's also create this object. So back in our player collision with the enemy. So at the point here where we're creating our points, let's also create an instance of our floating text. Up here, we're going to say instance create, and we're going to create our floating text. Our X is going to be relative to 0. Our Y is going to be our B box top, similar to what we had down here. Now the instance layer is fine to add it to, and I'm going to create a temporary variable called inst. And what that's doing is creating this instance, and the ID of that instance is then getting assigned to this variable. And by assigning the ID, I can actually reference this created instance and make a change to it. So basically we're creating an instance, and then I'm storing the number of that instance so that I can then reference it very quickly. So I'm going to use our apply to block, and we're going to apply it to this name. So if I just click here and type inst, and it could be anything, I'm just calling it inst because it stands for instance. You could assign it to a variable that is just a letter or another name that has more meaning for you. But because it's going to be just a temporary variable, I just do that and we make the change here to assign it to it. Now what do we want to do? We want to change the text variable. At the moment we're just creating a floating text object, and the text variable is set to 0. If you remember, if I jump back to it and have a look, our text is set to 0. So it's not going to display the points that we want to. So what we can do is use that inst variable to then tell it that the txt variable needs to be the value points. Now the value of points is an instance variable that is assigned to the enemy. Now the enemy code is here at the moment, and we are currently in the inst section. So we can use the keyword other to refer to the other instance in the situation. So if we say other.points, that refers to the point of the object before we ran it here, the things that are outside the apply to. Now, if you remember back on the video I showed of the Warcraft, it has a little plus symbol, which really helps to see that something good is happening. You're getting this item. It's not a minus. It's actually going towards you. So in order to add a plus to this, I first need to change this into a string, and I can use the function string and then brackets to convert the points just into a string. So now that our variable is a string, we can actually add to it. If I opened up some quotation marks and put a plus and then close it and then use a plus value, I'm taking one string and I'm adding it to another string. And Gamemaker will then add them together, and just the variable gets stored as 1. So essentially it'll say plus and then the value of points. So let's test that out. So now when we jump on the enemy, we should get the number appearing and our points get allocated. So the numbers appear, they look fine, but they actually don't move or vanish, and they look a little flat. So let's add a shadow to them. So back in the floating text, let's add a shadow just like we've done before. I'm going to take a copy of these two values, copy and paste. And I'm just going to draw the top one at offset of 1 and 1. I'm just going to change the color of the top one, and we'll just set it to sort of a black alpha there. Now, in order to move the text up, we can create a variable to control the speed, and also some variables to control the fading. So let's go over and we'll set some new variables here. I'm going to call the first one rise, and that's how much the text is going to rise. I'm going to set it to -1.2. And then I'm going to have another variable called alpha, and we'll set that to 1 initially, and then alpha increment, and we'll set that to minus 0.05. So the alpha will dictate how much of the image we can see. So you have an alpha value that is set between 0 and 1, with 0 meaning you can't see the object anymore, and 1 meaning it is fully opaque or solid. So if we slowly decrease the alpha by this increment amount, once it gets to 0, it means we can't see the object anymore and we can destroy it. Let's add a step event. Close this down. Now here's where we can add rise to the Y of the object, making it rise up. Also, we can decrease the alpha by that alpha increment variable. When it's below 0, then we can just destroy it. So let's drag in a set instance variable code block. I'm going to change the Y coordinate to be rise relative, and that'll apply that to the Y. I'm going to assign a variable for our alpha, and I'm going to set alpha to alpha increment relative. We're adding that to the alpha each step, and then we need a check here, and we say if our alpha value is less than or equal to 0, well then we no longer can see it. We basically want to destroy the object. Now in the draw event, we need to make sure this alpha value is being applied to our object. So go to draw, and just before we set our font, we can actually type in alpha here, and we can use that to set our draw alpha. So we want to set it to the variable alpha. And lastly, if you're changing the alpha for any draw object, that alpha will then be applied to every other object's drawing. So we don't want to do that, it'll all fade at the same time. I want to take a copy of this and right down the bottom, paste it here and set it back to the default of 1. So let's test that out. Press run. So now when we jump on an enemy, we should get our value appearing, and it's a little fast. So we need to, before fading it, we need to make it last a little bit longer on the screen. So in order to do that, I'm going to create another variable, and this time I'm going to call it time to fade. And let's just set it, say, to 40. And this will be how long until it allows it to fade. So in the step event, but now in here, we only want to do the fading and the destroying if our time to fade variable is less than 0. So let's do a check here. And we want to say if time to fade is less than or equal to 0, then we want to do all of this. Now at the moment, this time to fade value is not decreasing each step because we set it to 40, but nothing is making it go down. So you can do a little trick here, and if you want to decrease a variable or increase a variable by 1, you can add a minus to the variable, and therefore it'll check it and take 1 away from it. So let's try that again. So when we jump on the enemy, now our variable stays active for a little bit longer, and then it fades away at the top. Much better. Now what is really cool about this object is that we can use it for other displays as well. Like when we pick up a coin, we could display the amount and show it in a different color. So let's go to our coin, and let's go to our collision with our player, and we can create the same sort of instance right here. So right after we change to our pickup, let's create an instance, and it's going to be our floating text, and we're going to set it to relative for our X and bbox top for our Y position. And once again, we'll take a temp variable and we'll assign the number that's created to the variable inst. Let's get our apply to, bring that over, and we want to apply these things to our inst variable. The first thing we want to do is apply what text we want it to show. So the variable of floating text called txt, we want to assign, let's just say +1. So we're just drawing it directly here. We're making the assumption that whenever we pick up a coin, we're only ever getting 1 point for it. This could be a variable if you were going to make a change like that, but for us in this game, we're just going to set it to 1. And also we can change the color. So we can change the variable COL and set it to C_yellow. Now there's quite a lot of colors here. If you did want to find them, you can look in the manual, you press F1 and look up colors, and you can see a whole list of them to choose from. Now let's press play and test that out. So now when we jump on the enemies, we get the 10 appearing, and when we collect a coin, we get our coin values appearing as well. Now you can play around with the size if you're happy with that or whatever you want to do, but you might notice something a little strange, is that they overlap and they look a little odd. Even though it looks great having them there on the game, it does look a little strange when you're collecting a lot at once. So if you're interested in how you can make them grab their own space and make it look even better, and you're a Patreon, head over to the Patreon page and you can watch a special Patreon only video showing how something like that can be achieved. My Patreons help make this channel happen. I appreciate their support, and you can see these superstars listed here. If you find the content useful, consider supporting, as this enables me to create more cool tutorials for you to learn from. Patreons gain access to all the source code as well as any bonus tutorials, and all legendary Patreons get free access to my existing and future courses on Udemy. Udemy hosts my Gamemaker courses, which includes my latest platformer course. It's in GML, which is the next step up from drag and drop, and it can really help if you want to advance your Gamemaker skills. There's a special coupon code in the description where you can use it to get over 90% off the retail price. Lastly, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps me build the channel and create more cool content. That's all for now. I'll talk to you in the next one.